Alright, greetings students of international tax. Here we go. We are going to continue from where we last left off, but as a quick summarization of where we left off, we were talking outbound per the U.S. perspective. So it means U.S. corporation doing business overseas in some foreign country. FX, some foreign country. And what they were doing in our last discussion is they were doing it in one of two ways. One was they were doing it through a branch, which means not a separately incorporated or legally established entity in the foreign country, and as a result, the U.S. corporation continued to be subject to tax on all activity regardless of where it was, because that's the rules. U.S. taxpayers are subject to tax on income from whatever source derived, including wherever derived as well. So all income or losses were recognized by the branch and then reported directly to the U.S. corporation. There was no separation between the foreign activity and the activity in the foreign country. This was juxtaposed to the second way of conducting business overseas, where the U.S. Corp now owns a foreign corporation, an entity, legalized entity, and now the issue is, well, what kind of entity is it? If it is a per se corporation, meaning the regulations say it is considered a corporation, then it will be considered a foreign corporation. Any income or loss reported by this foreign corporation stays in that foreign corporation, and U.S. tax is not paid unless there is dividends paid to the U.S. parent. Aren't these colors kind of interesting? We'll continue to keep the afternoon like a rainbow. So if dividends are paid, U.S. tax is paid, but not before that if we have a foreign corporation. If you don't have a foreign corporation, if it's not a per se corporation, what if not? Then you have the choice of deciding what you would like it to be, because under the current existing regulations you get to check the box, which means you decide what do you want it to be. This takes off the guesswork of what is it. In the old days, in case it wasn't clear in the first lecture on this material, in the old days you had to look at different attributes of what is a corporation and determine, is the foreign entity a corporation or not. You had to make that determination. Now you don't have to get involved in what is it, because, well, it looks like a corporation, but some of the things are different than a corporation here. Some things are the same, some not, and it becomes a guessing game as to how the U.S. should look at it. This check the box takes the guessing game off the charts, and you just make your own decision. You decide, and by checking the box, you could say it's A, not a corporation, in which case it'll be a flow-through entity. And we said that one of the advantages of that is that the losses flow through. Or B, you can make it a corporation if you want. The losses don't flow through, but the income doesn't flow through either, and you only pay U.S. tax when you pay dividends, just like in this diagram here. So that was the idea of the concept of going outbound, and when you are setting up a foreign entity, it's not a branch, because a branch is not a foreign entity. You're just putting a U.S. office over there and doing business. The question is, what is it when it's a entity status in the foreign country? And if it's not per se, it's check the box time for you, and then you'll make the decision. So that's what we were dealing with. When we got to the status of you checked the box, or it was a per se corporation, meaning the foreign entity was a corporation, and we were saying, oh, well, the good thing about that, the pro of having that kind of a situation, is that no U.S. tax are paid unless dividends are paid. And we talked briefly about the fact that currently one of the big issues that the United States has to deal with is that since other countries have a lower tax rate than the United States, currently there is trillions of dollars, we don't even know exactly how much, trillions of untaxed by the U.S. sitting in these foreign companies, these foreign corporations overseas, trillions of untaxed dollars by the U.S., just waiting for what? When the dividend gets paid. So one of the things that's going on now, to bring you up to date with this issue, is the United States is considering tax law that would encourage the U.S. companies that own these kinds of foreign subsidiaries, these foreign corporations. They're considering tax law that would encourage dividends to be paid. The reason why the U.S. government is interested in doing this is because this money, all this money would come back to the U.S. Currently it is held in foreign corporations, foreign accounts, foreign countries, and if the dividends were paid back to the U.S. shareholders, it comes back to our economy, and that could be it could be a good thing economically. And Congress certainly thinks it's a good thing, and that's why they're considering doing this. And one of the ways they're considering it is coming up with a special low tax rate on these dividends. Maybe even no tax. I don't think it would be no tax. They still want to tax it here some way, but they're looking at a low tax rate for the payment of these particular dividends, the dividends that are currently held overseas. You will see something happen on this, I am fairly certain, in the next couple of years. So stay tuned to see how Congress deals with it. It could happen this year. I feel certain it'll happen next year at the very least. It's a question about whether a new tax law will go into effect this year, in a major tax law, that is. It's a little bit unclear whether Congress is going to be able to get to that and handle that and actually pass something this year. So I'm still on the fence as to whether it'll be this year or next year, but you'll get to enjoy that when you as you read about it and see it on the news. All right, so this is very interesting and brings us to yet another concept in international tax, which is, let's take the following, and what we're going to basically be doing here is we're going to look at the reason for Subpart F. That's where we're headed. We're headed towards learning about Subpart F of the United States Tax Code. Subpart F is found not only in the U.S. tax code, but many other countries have adopted the same principle. Sometimes they even call it Subpart F income. In fact, the OECD, in many instances in writing about principles of international taxation, refer to this following concept that we're going to learn about as taxing Subpart F income, because that's how it's written in the U.S. code. It just happens to be. The U.S. tax code is like an outline where it has Roman numerals and ABCs and all that kind of stuff. So the U.S. tax code's in this methodology of an outline where it starts with maybe Roman numeral 1, then it has an A. And so this will be considered like this might be part of the title. And actually, let me just do it the right way, show you what I mean by this. You would have a situation in the outline where you would have a chapter, and the chapter might be let's say chapter C, then you'll have a sub-chapter, and that sub-chapter might be, the chapter would be probably something along the lines of Roman numeral 1, and then the subchapters would be A, B, C, and so on in the outline. And at some part of the outline, because it continues to get increasingly more complex as an outline, but at some part, the whole reason I was mentioning is at some part, at some part of the outline, not subpart, but at some part of the outline, you get to something called, this is Subpart F, and the F just happens to be the letter in the outline where you had a subpart A, B, C, D, E, F. You could have G and H after that, I don't know. But that's the whole concept, that where this tax law falls is in the outline of the Internal Revenue Code under the area called subpart F. So it's not called subpart F because F stands for foreign or anything like that. It's just a point in the Internal Revenue Code where it falls. All right, having given you that sort of almost worthless information, but not quite worthless, because it's important to get an idea of why is it called that. It's not called that for any reason, but we will refer to it as Subpart F quite often, just like the OECD does. And the OECD, by the way, is an international organization, primarily handling the European nations and the EU, but many others as well. In fact, most of the world, for that matter. So the OECD, when I mentioned that to you, is quite a big player in the concept of what should be the rules and the games of the nature and the borders of international tax. The United States cooperates for the most part with the OECD, but the United States in the past has shall we say, felt strong enough to go its own way and sometimes ignore dealing with the OECD or cooperating with them, and that's caused some of the issues and problems with international tax because in order to have really good international tax relationships between countries in their transactions, their cross-border transactions, you really need the cooperation of all the countries. It's not to say the United States has been a thorn in the side of the OECD or the United States has been making trouble. It's just making the statement that we're sort of still in a zone of we don't have the best of all worlds with international tax regimes because the OECD and the United States still need to get together and a host of other reasons. It's not the only reason. So I wouldn't put a whole lot of blame on the United States here or the OECD. I would say that it's my opinion that the OECD has been a little bit more cooperative in trying to get a universal concept of how countries should handle each other in international tax schemes and regimes and transactions, and the U.S. has been a little bit less cooperative. I would say that, but not to the point of where it's been a hindrance to getting someplace. I think we'll still see some movement in the next few years where the cooperation will yield some positive results. That's going to take a little bit longer than just seeing the United States do something for its corporations that have that money overseas to get it back here, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. Okay, so where does this all lead to? This all is leading to the following fact. If there are these trillions of dollars held overseas in foreign corporations, and the United States is interested in getting them back, the United States has also been in the past 20 or 30, 40 years interested in, well, what's happening with this money overseas? Is it been fair that tax is not recognized in the U.S. on the money earned by these corporations until dividends have been paid to the U.S. shareholders? What do I mean by has it been fair? Well, it's certainly arguable that it's not fair right now because the United States hasn't had a chance to tax it. One might say that. But let's look at the reality. The reality of the situation is that you have a U.S. parent company, P, let's say, and they set up a foreign corporation, and they're doing business in the foreign country. So we'll say that's F. To identify it as a country, we'll just say it's F-C-O-N-T-R-Y. F country. So they're doing business in that country. Why should they, particularly if they're separately incorporated, why should it pay U.S. tax? It's not a U.S. corporation. It's not a U.S. resident. And it means that F country should have the ability to tax it. And the taxes to the United States shouldn't happen until the dividends, and that seems perfectly right. So that's exactly where it sits. But what if, and here's the interesting part, what if the situation is the following? What if the parent company, we'll put this in red because we got the devil now playing. The devil's always the advocate. The devil is the parent corporation sets up this foreign corporation, but all the activity of the foreign corporation is taking place in some other country. So they're selling to some other country or they're servicing some other country. What have they done? Well, they've set up a foreign corporation over here to take advantage of that country's laws, that country's low rates or tax treaty. And really what they're doing is they're doing business somewhere else. And now you have what's known as a tax shelter. We'll hold here and pick it up in 1 second.